Hi guys, welcome to day 3 of our At this point, we've kind of talked a little bit about similes. We've done a lot of work with metaphors. We've taken a look at our alliteration and onomatopoeia pieces, and we've done a couple different activities. So yesterday we went through and we talked a little bit about onomatopoeia. In doing so, we made sure to take a look at our whole long list of it. We watched our rap video on onomatopoeia to get a good idea and feel for how it's used in context. And as far as alliteration, we wrote our own tongue twisters based on ourselves. We shared with the class, we shared with a partner. We went through the editing process as well to make sure that we designed our own little kind of visual piece to kind of show off our tongue twisters once we finished with it. Okay, so for today we're going to be talking about idioms. I know I mentioned on day 1 when we kind of defined literal language and figurative language. Idioms are really where the figurative language part comes into play, because idioms are always going to be a phrase which means something completely different than its literal meaning. The meaning of idioms are changed, but they can be understood in the vernacular. So basically it can be understood in context. However, it can be very, very difficult for those who maybe are not familiar with our figures of speech or with our language when doing idioms or using them in our everyday language. So for instance, if you know anyone from another country or someone who doesn't necessarily speak English as their first language, idioms and figurative language can be very, very challenging for them just because it's not literal meaning here, and it's sometimes hard to pick it up in context as far as what we're meaning to say. I have a couple idioms listed below. The first one says, "When Jenna was caught lying, she knew she was in a pickle." Now, does it mean she's literally sitting inside of a pickle? No, that's not what we're saying here. What we are saying is that she is in an awkward or embarrassing situation, okay? So if you're in a pickle, you're just kind of in an awkward spot. Now, like I said, if you're someone from another language and you said, "Oh, I'm in a pickle today," they really would not understand. And that's why the context is so important, especially when using idioms, okay? Another example I have listed for us is, "George answered in an angry tone, but his bark is worse than his bite." So by saying that his bark is worse than his bite, basically what I'm saying is that his words are a lot tougher than his actions. He might say a lot, or he might give you a stern talking to, but his actions aren't really going to match that, okay? So keep that in mind too. The next one, "Mother arrived in the nick of time." So, in the nick of time means just before time is up. It doesn't mean that you have a friend named Nick who just showed up right in time. So keep that in mind as well as we're moving forward with these idioms. There will be some idioms that you may come across that you're a little unsure about. I know, for instance, one idiom that my 4th graders last year really seemed to struggle with was tying the knot. That was something they hadn't really heard a lot. And if you know tying the knot, then you know that if you're tying the knot with someone that you are getting married. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Really take notice of the context in which these idioms are being used. So for today on Google Classroom, you do have a follow-up activity. You're going to define each of these idioms. Try it on your own first based on the context. If you're not so certain, you can always go to our idiom dictionary to kind of help yourself out. Or even try to brainstorm with a neighbor if you really are not sure before moving to that idiom dictionary. Okay? You're going to go ahead and complete this on Google Classroom, and then you're going to move on to the personification part. And speaking of, let's take a look at what personification really is within figurative language. So when we're talking about personification, we are talking about when we're giving human qualities or traits to an animal or an inanimate object of some sort. Okay, so basically it could be an idea, it could be an animal, an inanimate object, but we're giving those things, those items, human characteristics or human traits, and really that's the big takeaway. It says personification. We're talking about people and human abilities, okay? Take a look at number 1 for my example. "Everyone looked when the lightning danced across the sky." Now when we look at this example, the inanimate object is going to be lightning here, okay? And what is the lightning doing? It's dancing across the sky. Now we know that lightning doesn't dance. Lightning can strike, lightning can move, but it's not certainly dancing by any means, okay? By having the word dancing, though, it's giving you kind of that elegant visual, okay, of the sky. Take a look down below. Rover smiled when his owner opened the dog treat bag. Okay, now Rover, we're assuming is a dog here because there's a dog treat bag involved. Does it mean that the dog is really smiling? Well, I don't know if dogs can necessarily smile. Some would like to believe so. But smiling is not typical of a trait for a dog, right? That's a human quality or a human characteristic. So in this case, that would be personification. The next one. The last piece of pie is calling my name. Now, can food talk to us? Figuratively, sure, but not in real life, okay? So it's not like there's a piece of pie out there literally calling your name to you. Maybe it looks very good and it's appealing to you, but it's not going to be calling your name. So that's a human quality or trait that we're giving the pie or the non-living item. And then finally, my last example for personification. The traffic on the way home from work slowed to a crawl. Now, can traffic or cars crawl? No, traffic can't crawl. Babies crawl, right? That's a very human trait or person kind of trait. But unfortunately, our cars and vehicles do not. So keep that in mind too. For your activity for personification on Google Classroom, you're going to explain the personification in each of these examples. So kind of like what I just did on the slide before, you're going to take a look at each of these examples and you're going to go ahead and tell me exactly what is being personified here and kind of explain a little bit. Don't just say stars are being personified, but tell me, what do you mean by that? How do you know? Okay, what's that human quality that they are making that inanimate object or animal kind of do or show or portray in the example? Okay, so when you go to Google Classroom and kind of take a look at your first bit, you will be working on those practice activities together. I do have a video here as well for you over idioms. If I click view here, and this is kind of a fun one. When you take a look, it really shows you literally what these idioms would look like if they were literal figures of language. So food for thought. Clearly our thoughts don't eat or drink, but if they were to, that would be an image. Soap opera, so literally a soap dispenser in an opera gown. Serial killers, your Cheerios out on a manhunt there. Your blind spot, the seeing cane. Touch a chord. Do one more. And then a heavy heart. So you can kind of see here, there are tons of different examples. It's kind of a fun thing to go through and kind of take a peek at. And after you take a peek at it and get some great ideas, I do have an activity that we're going to be doing together as a class. So just as an overview to get you ready for what we'll be doing today, you will need a couple things. I have idiom cards attached and you'll be getting those passed out to you. We'll be pulling out our whiteboards. We are also going to have markers and timers, and we are going to choose the first artist at random. And what you're going to be doing is an idiom quick draw here. So you're going to be taking a look at some of the examples. So cost an arm and a leg, ball is in your court. You're going to randomly choose one of these out of a hat, and then you are going to illustrate and draw for me what this would look like literally, kind of like those pictures that we just saw in that video. Okay, now once you do the literal drawing, I want you to explain it. So what do you mean it costs an arm and a leg? So at the bottom of that one, you would say something very expensive. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and get going on that. Now, we're going to do this in two different ways. It's up to you if you would like to draw it in the traditional paper, pencil, markers, crayons, that whole shebang. Or if you're someone who's a little bit more tech savvy, you will be able to work on telegami as far as illustrating it and building it kind of with your own avatar and your own flair, and you can make it kind of a cartoon out of it. Okay? So you can kind of take two paths here. You can either use some of the apps on our iPad to show an illustration and submit that into Google Classroom, or you could do the paper version as far as crayons, markers, pencils, colored pencils go. So you can decide here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let you get started on working your way through this practice activity and watching the video, and then we'll go ahead and stop here once I notice that most of our class is finished with that, and then we'll take a look at this quick draw idiom task, and I'll get you started depending on your mode of trying to complete that assignment. All right, thanks guys.